for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, thanks to the witnesses for being here for some very enlightening and informative testimony. I want to go back to my opening comments and try to address them with how I see this, how I see it now. Professor Osler, I appreciate the diagram that you put up there, and Professor Barco, I read your statement, and I find it very interesting as well. But I want to. We have a real short amount of time, so I'm going to keep you on a short leash. But I do want your responses to this, because when you talked about this, both of you, and I wrote down next to yours, Ms. Barco. I wrote, creating a system outside the system. I get it. This is the system as it currently sits. This is the system. It grew organically. But the president controls this system. Is my point, and I think we all agree to that. And so my question is if you create a system outside the system, which is kind of what we're talking about, are you not just sticking another box on that board? And that's would be my concern if you really want to streamline this. Are you just? And I'll go to you first, Ms. Barco.
There's no guarantee that that's not the case. I concede that, because you can't force the president to use it. If you create an additional body. I think, though, that it wouldn't work out that way because, one, this president has claimed that he wants to create a body outside of the Department of Justice. He just hasn't done it. And two, I think Congress creating something like this gives it an imprimatur that Congress thinks it's a good idea. And the idea would be having that agency set up, and I would think of it more like an advisory board, would kind of sell itself because the president would find it to be useful. But there's no guarantee, and you could find that the president decides, I don't want to use that, I want to stick with this, or I'm going to take that and funnel it.
I hate to cut you, but go to Professor Osler real quick.
Yeah, we would hope that the president would not make that bad choice. And I'd point something out, too, that the president doesn't pick everybody in this chart. That certainly picks the DAG, and sometimes is happy with that choice and sometimes not. But the staff...
But the rubric...
Well, and that's...
He could change that rubric today. And he's approved only 78 clemencies. We've seen, after President Obama left, you had 13,000 in the pipeline. You had 14,000 after Trump. You've got 18,000 today. Any president... And I'm not saying either party or the other. They're the ones that actually could change the systemic. Because I think, Mr. Osler, you're describing what I would say is maybe a potentially systemic problem here. And if it's a systemic problem, the Constitution gives one individual the authority to actually clean up that process. And we may send a signal from the Congress. We may not. And I would suggest that those signals have probably been sent for multiple administrations. So how do you avoid just putting another box on there? And I'm going to give you about 10 seconds because I have to get some other questions answered.
Yeah, well, I just want to note that when the president sets a rubric and says, I want these people out, this system has done terribly. For example, most recently, we had President Biden saying, I want people from the CARES Act. You got a handful.
I get it, yeah. I mean, I think there's probably everybody sitting at this table and through at the room to say the rubric might have some real issues, okay? So I thank you for that. And I wanted to get to you, Mr. Murray. What role do the actual victims of violent crime, because we have about 8% of everybody that's in federal prison is requesting clemency. So what role does a victim of violent crime have in this current rubric, or should have in clemency decisions?
Is that question addressed to me?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that part of it.
Yeah.
My perception is that that's a very minimal role, and the other difficulty there is how you define victim. Talk to a mother whose 20-year-old son just died of an overdose drug that was trafficked to that 20-year-old. That mother's a victim. There's a lot of variety on that question. I don't believe there's significant input. I keep hearing the term bias from the side of prosecutors, but a number of the panelists and a number of the people involved in the process come from the defense side, from the offender side, and where do we balance potential bias?
I hate to cut you off because I appreciate it, sure. But I wanted to get to Mr. Hurst. You've experienced this on both sides, defending and prosecuting. Where does the victim fit in this process?
the victim should fit into this process. I mean, this is the whole point of law enforcement, to keep us safe and to prevent people from becoming victims. And so, yes, victims should have a role in this process, just as they have a role when we prosecute federal crimes. We have a victim witness coordinator in every U.S. Attorney's office in the nation, and we consult with victims when we prosecute cases.
Thank you. My time's expired. Thank you, Madam Chair.